The grand opening party of Alex's luxurious restaurant attracted the attention of the whole town. The guests were all influential people, dressed sharply and chatting lively. In a secluded corner, Mr. James, an elderly, thin man with deep-set eyes wearing a faded simple suit, stood quietly watching his son. He didn't dare to step in. Standing before the dazzling scene, he felt small and insignificant. But then, a spark of determination flickered. "Alex will be happy to see me," he told himself. He stepped inside, his hands trembling as he clutched a small gift, a handkerchief he had sewn himself from leftover fabric at home. But as soon as he approached Alex, a cold stare halted him. "Father, I'm sorry, but I can't accept you as my father anymore," Alex said, his voice even but distant. The laughter and chatter in the party abruptly stopped. All eyes turned toward Mr. James. Whispers began to spread. Is this really Alex's father? He looks so old-fashioned. Maybe he's trying to take advantage of his son's success. Mr. James stood frozen. His son's words felt like a knife cutting into his heart. No one knew that behind that rejection lay a story filled with pain and secrets Alex didn't want anyone to know. But why would a son reject the father who raised him? Alex turned his back and walked away, leaving Mr. James standing there, still holding the gift. In the glittering lights of the party, Mr. James's small figure seemed to merge with the darkness, slowly fading from everyone's sight. Mr. James walked out of the party, his legs trembling as if they no longer had the strength to stand. Suddenly, rain began to pour. The handkerchief in his hand became soaked, the stitches he had sewn blurring, much like his heart, squeezed tight by Alex's words. He didn't blame Alex. In his mind, Alex had endured so many hardships as a child. As a father, he always thought every fault was his own. Perhaps he just wanted a better life without being held back by his past. He told himself this, trying to walk through the rain. When he returned to the small house at the edge of town, where he had been living with Alex's help, he was surprised to find a stranger packing his belongings. "What are you doing here? This is my house," Mr. James hurriedly asked, but was met with a cold stare from the stranger. "This house has been sold. The new owner is me. Your son signed the contract yesterday." Mr. James was stunned. This small house was the only place he could call home, but now it was being taken away. He called Alex, hoping it was just a misunderstanding, but Alex didn't answer. After several failed attempts, he received a brief text. "Father, please move to the countryside or stay at a temple. I can't take care of you anymore." On his way, wandering in search of shelter, Mr. James sat under a small awning. The rain still poured, and the cold wind blew, making him huddle in his wet clothes. His old eyes closed, and memories rushed back like a slow-motion film. He remembered the difficult days when he was both father and mother, raising Alex alone. His wife had died in a workplace accident, leaving him with a young son under 5. He did every job from pulling rickshaws to collecting scrap, just so his son could go to school like other children. Once, when Alex fell seriously ill, Mr. James had to sell everything he owned to pay for treatment. At that time, Alex had held his hand, tears in his eyes. "Father, I promise I will take care of you when I grow up. I won't let you suffer anymore." But now those promises were just memories. Mr. James went to a small temple to seek shelter. The monk there recognized him and remembered the family story from years ago. While chatting, he accidentally met a middle-aged man named John, an old friend of Alex. John recognized him immediately. "My God, Mr. James, what are you doing here? Where's Alex? Why didn't he bring you along?" Mr. James just smiled sadly, avoiding the painful topic, but John wouldn't let it go. Eventually, Mr. James recounted everything. When he finished, John stood silent. "Do you know Alex was deceived in the past? All of this happened because you tried to help him, and it led to disaster," John said, his voice lowering. John explained that many years ago, Alex had suffered a huge failure in his startup business because of a fraudulent partner. To save Alex from debt, Mr. James had sold everything he owned and even borrowed money. But Alex thought his father was the reason he was never good enough to succeed, because Mr. James was too conservative and ignorant. The story left Mr. James speechless. It turned out that his sacrifice had unintentionally become a burden in Alex's eyes. After rejecting his father, Alex quickly returned to the rhythm of his work. He was the CEO of a famous restaurant chain, admired for his business skills and cold demeanor. But trouble came for everyone. One day, Alex received news from the press that his restaurant chain was embroiled in a scandal over poor quality food. The news spread quickly, followed by angry customers and harsh media criticism. The situation forced Alex to hold a press conference. But during the conference, instead of receiving sympathy, a journalist suddenly asked, "You talk a lot about social responsibility, but there are rumors that you've rejected your biological father. Is that true?" The question hit like a hard blow, leaving Alex stunned. He tried to avoid the question, but the scrutinizing gazes from the audience and the camera lenses didn't allow him to escape easily. The news of Alex rejecting his biological father quickly spread everywhere. Articles, social media, and even those who once admired him all turned their backs. How can a man who's so ungrateful talk about responsibility? No matter how successful he is, this man is truly despicable. The restaurant chain, already struggling, faced even more difficulties. Partners began to withdraw, and shareholders demanded that Alex resign to save the company. Alex felt like everything was collapsing before his eyes. He sat quietly in his office, holding his phone but unable to call his father. Despite the guilt weighing on him, he stubbornly told himself, "He never understood the pressure I'm under." Amidst the storm of public opinion, an unexpected post appeared on social media. The author was Mr. James. In the post, he confessed that all the faults were his own. "I am a bad father. I made my son endure pressure throughout his childhood. If you want to blame someone, blame me. Don't hurt him anymore." The post quickly attracted attention, but instead of helping Alex, it fueled even more outrage. A father so old still protecting his son, it's heartbreaking. Alex can turn his back on a father like this, truly unworthy of being called a man. After reading his father's post, Alex felt a strange sensation in his heart. He decided to drive back to the old house, the one where his father once lived. But when he arrived, the house had been sold, and his father was nowhere to be found. In the pouring rain, Alex went to the temple, where he had been told his father was staying. There he saw Mr. James kneeling before a Buddha statue, praying in the dim candlelight. Mr. James didn't turn around when Alex entered, but somehow he sensed his presence. "Alex, why are you here?" Mr. James's voice was hoarse with emotion. Alex didn't answer. He simply stood there, looking at his father, who had aged so much, thin and weathered, unable to say a word. As Alex was about to leave the temple, Mr. James ran after him to see him off. But while crossing the road to stop Alex's car, a truck suddenly sped towards them. "Father, be careful!" Alex shouted, but it was too late. Mr. James was thrown aside. The sight of it pierced Alex's heart like a knife. He rushed over, holding his father, who was lying motionless on the road. Blood soaked Mr. James's clothes, but he still reached out to hold his son's hand. "I'm fine. Just seeing you here makes me content," he said. Those words made Alex break down in tears, for the first time in years. Mr. James was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. On the operating table, his frail body struggled to survive the severe injuries. Alex sat in the hallway, his hands clasped together, his heart full of regret. He couldn't erase the image of his father lying motionless on the street, blood spilling everywhere. The longer he waited, the more Alex was consumed by memories. He remembered how, as a child, every time he fell, his father was the first to rush to his side and hold him. The doctor came out, his face tense. "His condition is very critical. He needs immediate surgery, but the chances of recovery are very low." Alex nodded without hesitation. "Do whatever it takes to save my father." While Mr. James was undergoing surgery, Alex met with John, his father's old friend. John handed Alex an old file, inside which were debt papers, land sale contracts, and a handwritten letter from Mr. James. In the letter, Mr. James confessed that to help Alex get startup capital, he had borrowed money from an underground lending organization. When Alex's business failed, Mr. James took full responsibility, selling all his assets and working tirelessly for years to pay off the debt in his son's place. Alex read each line of the letter with trembling hands. He couldn't believe that his father had silently borne all these burdens, while he himself had blamed Mr. James as the burden of his life. John sighed and added, "Alex, your father is not just a parent. He's the unsung hero of your life." After several hours, the doctor informed Alex that the surgery had been successful, but Mr. James remained in a coma. Alex sat beside his father's bed, holding his frail hand. Unable to control himself, he broke down in tears. "I was wrong, Father. I've been terrible. How could you ever forgive me?" Mr. James's eyes fluttered slightly, as if he had heard his son's voice. In the days that followed, Alex never left the hospital. He personally cared for his father, from feeding him to helping him bathe. Every small action was his way of atoning for his mistakes. Alex's business was still in critical condition. Shareholders pressured him to either return or step down to protect the brand. Alex stood at a crossroads: return to save the company or stay and care for his father. After many days of struggle, Alex decided to give up everything. Money could be earned again, but if I lose my father, I'll never forgive myself. His decision shocked the business world. Once a rising star in the industry, Alex now chose to leave everything behind to fulfill his duties as a son. Thanks to Alex's dedicated care, Mr. James began to recover. One day, as sunlight poured through the hospital window, he opened his eyes and saw Alex dozing by his bedside. "Alex, you've worked so hard," Mr. James said, his voice weak but full of love. Alex jumped up, tears streaming down his face. "Father, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. From now on, I won't let you suffer anymore." Mr. James smiled gently, his trembling hand brushing Alex's head. "You've come back. That's enough." A few months later, Mr. James was healthier, though still weak. Alex brought his father to a small house in the countryside, where he devoted all his time to taking care of him. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Mr. James suddenly said, "I know how much pressure you've been under. I don't blame you. I just want you to remember that family is the place you can always return to, whether you succeed or fail." Alex nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I promise I will never forget." Mr. James passed away a year later, but Alex had completely changed. He returned to rebuild his career with a different mindset, always placing the value of family and compassion above all else. The story ends with Alex standing before his father's grave, holding the old handkerchief, the gift Mr. James had brought to the party years ago. In the glow of the sunset, Alex whispered, "Father, I understand now. Thank you for everything." The story emphasizes the lesson of forgiveness, the value of family, and respect for those who have sacrificed for us. It evokes sympathy and reminds us that sometimes it is only after we lose something important that we realize what truly matters in life. The story of Mr. James and Alex is not just an emotional journey full of tears, but also a profound lesson on father-son relationships, filial piety, and the power of forgiveness. If this story has touched your heart, please help us spread this meaningful message to others. Don't forget to click subscribe to support the channel and receive notifications when we post more touching and meaningful life stories. Click like if you resonate with this story. Share your thoughts in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. Click the bell so you don't miss any of our latest videos. Your support is the motivation for us to continue sharing meaningful stories that inspire people. Thank you so much.